We have two scripture readings this morning. The first one is Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50, and that's found on page 1027 of your Pew Bible. And then we're going to jump backwards to Matthew chapter 23, which will be found on 984. So we're going to start off with Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 50. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, when she learned that she was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Then when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman that is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." And Jesus answering said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." And he answered, "Say it, teacher." And you know what? At this point, I'd be like, okay. A certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, "The one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt." And he said to him, "You have judged rightly." Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little." And he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this? Who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Jumping back to Matthew chapter 23, beginning with verse 13 and running up to 36. Jesus is issuing a rebuke here, so pay attention to the woes that he issues. "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides who say, 'If anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath.' You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, 'If anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier measures of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Those you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, then the outside may also be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, If we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus, you witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteousness bloodshed on earth, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. May God add his blessing to his word.
I try to imagine that crowd as they're listening to Jesus say those things. And there were Pharisees and scribes standing there. Can you imagine Jesus locking eyes and saying, "Woe to you, you hypocrites, you blind guides." I was originally going to open this with what you see in your bulletin, but I've decided to change my opening. I do want to call your attention just a minute to what is there in the opening. We live in a time when truth is a commodity. I just want to read through those. Truth is a commodity in relationships. We lie to our friends, we tell white lie to our friends, and we tell the honest truth behind our enemies' backs, you know. Isn't that true? We lie to our friends so that they'll remain our friends, and we tell the truth behind the back of those that we don't like. You know, truth is to be power of leverage. You know, don't tell the truth if it's going to hurt you. Only tell the truth that's going to hurt somebody else. That's what we see happening oftentimes in our political arenas. And then my truth is to be expressed unchallenged. I listened to an interview. I didn't listen to the whole interview, but the person interviewing saying, "Well, we want to hear your truth." And I was like, what in the world is that? We want to hear your truth, okay? So you're going to be able to say whatever you want. Nobody can challenge it because it's your truth. I have a little cartoon a meme, a game show. This is a game show called Facts Don't Matter, okay? And over here it says, "Sorry, Arthur, your answer was actually correct, but Paul shouted his opinion louder, so he gets the point." And an extra bonus point goes to Sue because as she was offended by your answer. What I want to talk about in my opening is I heard some continuing be disturbing things this week. Amazon is no longer going to allow books to be sold on Amazon that have anything to do with transgender counseling of transgender people. So a lot of Christian counseling books will no longer be able to be sold on Amazon. I think it's time to start buying our Christian books from christianbook.com, especially those of our counseling. The other thing that I don't know if you stay informed. I don't watch too much of the news because it just gets me irritated, and I'd rather pray than get irritated. But I do want you to know that the agenda of the public education system is becoming very aggressive as far as same-sex and other things that are involved. And I just looked up a couple things. I'm not even going to show you some of this stuff, but do you know what's in 5th grade textbooks now? Cartoons of young people talking to each other about sex acts. And they do it in cartoons so that they can get away with it, and they're talking to each other about it, and this is what is heading for. But there's actually a way of doing this. There's a book and a strategy formed by James Bank. It's a 4-part strategy. It's a four-part way of getting our young people, getting society to accept this agenda. The first is the level one of contributions. You highlight heroes, holidays, and discrete cultural elements. This is a way of just, in a very gentle way, introducing things like International Transgender Day of Visibility, March 31st, LBGT Pride Month, the month of June, LGBT History Month, the month of October, and National Coming Out Day, October 11th. So in your school system now, they're going to be emphasizing these different things. The second level is called the additive level. Now you begin to add concepts, illustration, themes, and perspectives to the existing curriculum that will help move this agenda forward. Let me give you just two examples. In second grade, there's a textbook now called There Are Different Kinds of Families. Okay, second grade, there's a textbook now that's called Different Kinds of Families. And it goes through all the different kinds of families, and I'm sure you can imagine there's somebody there with two mommies or two daddies or, everything. In fourth grade, there's a textbook that now celebrates the history of how same-sex couples can now get married in the United States. And they specifically point out a photograph of Chris Perry and Sandy Steyer and tell the story of how they finally were able to tie the knot. Level 3 is the transformational approach. This means that you no longer just introduce these elements, but now it becomes the driving engine. The point of this is for educators in the realm of substantive changes in the curriculums. They have recast the content. They've recast the content to encourage multiple perspectives of concepts, issues, events, and themes. You know what the fourth level is? Social action. Practitioners now give control to the students who now decide and act on the social issues important to them. The teacher who came up with this and wrote this article said that she knew, or not that came up with, but wrote this article, knew that she had accomplished her purpose when she saw her students leading the marches and the protests. This is the day that we're living in. I was brought up in what I would term a perhaps unhealthy sense of peace. My parents, we were not allowed to argue as kids. I don't know what your household was like, but we were not allowed to argue. And when we started arguing, my parents would kind of walk in and say, I don't care who's wrong, you all apologize. I don't know why my parents made that choice, but it never settled anything. You were kind of like, I'm sorry, and I don't know, maybe it was the way my parents were raised. My father was raised in an alcoholic home where my grandfather would beat up his wife until my father at 17 said, you touch my mother again, I'm going to beat you up. I don't think that was peace at any cost. My mother was raised in an orphanage where she had to fight for her younger sister for 6 years while they lived in an orphanage because her stepmother didn't want them. So I don't know if that unhealthy sense of peace came from just wanting to, but we were raised with the idea that to have peace is to be spiritual. And peace needs to come at any cost. My parents kind of taught us that even if you were wrong, find something to apologize for. I don't know. Anybody had that philosophy? If your parents are here, don't raise your hand. But I don't care. I don't care who was wrong. You find something to apologize for. And if you can't find something to apologize, you make up something to apologize for. This is not the way to go. And this certainly is not the way in which, growing up as a kid, I thought that that was the Christian thing, to have peace and to even apologize, even when you weren't wrong, as long as it would accomplish peace and it would bring things back together, then it would be okay even to apologize for something that you really didn't do or didn't intend. There's a problem, though. You see, we're living in a time right now where the world and even other Christians are telling we need to apologize for truth, or we need to explain God. We need to apologize for things that the Bible says. And what's happened is that truth is being hijacked by those who believe that because of the way the Bible teaches about reconciliation and meekness and humility, that they can take the truths of the Bible, turn them against us, and get us to apologize for things. But see, when you apologize for the truth, what are you doing? When you apologize for the truth, what are you doing? You're saying it's not true. Jesus says, if you are ashamed of me, and then he goes further and he says, if you're ashamed of my words. When we apologize for the truth, it's an admission that we are ashamed of what the Bible says. And it could be any particular thing. It could be about it could be about some of these things that we're talking about with homosexuality, or it could be that we're apologizing about hell, or we're apologizing about something else. They've hijacked the story of the Good Samaritan, and where Jesus said that we weren't to define who our neighbors are, now they've taken this and they've defined who our neighbors are and told us who we can forgive and who is unforgivable. When I read these accounts of Jesus, as a kid, I had no way of dealing with these accounts where Jesus is saying to them, you hypocrites, you hypocrites. He's looking them in the eye and he is saying, you are hypocrites. He calls them blind guides leading people astray. You know what's bad about blind guides? They don't know where they're going, and the people that they're leading, they could be leading right over a cliff. And Jesus is, as a child, and the way in which my personality and the way I was raised, I had no way of dealing with these scriptural passages. I had no way of dealing with Jesus, who cleared the temple with a whip. Oh, he only used the whip on the animals, and he only used the whip to turn over the table. I don't think so. Because of the way in which we were raised and some of the attitudes, it was like, what do we do with that? Was Jesus sinning at the time? Was he allowing anger and sin to come across? Did he only whip the animals? How many of you think he only whipped the animals? Nobody's going to raise no hands here. Don't worry, you're not on camera. Oh, he only, basically, what I was led to believe is that only Jesus could be that angry or upset and not have it cross over into sin. There's no way that we would be able to ever do something. There's no way we could look at people and call them hypocrites to their face and call them blind guides. Now, nobody said that directly to me, but that's what I was led to believe, because Christians don't talk like that, right? My Jesus is a gentleman. My Jesus is a loving man. You know what? You love the Father and you love the truth, and there are times when my Jesus is a blunt man. Okay? And so over like the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at some of these, not to stir us to anger, but to stir us to courage and to grow a backbone. My Jesus was a blunt man when it came to the truth. And there are times that are coming when we're going to need to be just as blunt. But I want you to know that there is no dichotomy between love and being blunt. I want you to turn to, we're going to start in Matthew 5 and 6 and Matthew 23. If we get to the Luke 7, that's fine. If not, we'll save it for another time. There's an important progression for you to see in the Sermon on the Mount and then into Matthew 23. And if you don't put these together, you miss the progression of what's happening here. You know the Beatitudes, Jesus goes through those, and then you know that the next section, I'm ahead of my notes, so let me get there. In Matthew 5:20, Jesus says to them, and Pastor Jim actually, I think, referred to this one, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." So he is saying, listen, your righteousness needs to exceed. It needs to go beyond what the scribes and the Pharisees do. The scribes and the Pharisees were known as very, very respected, religious, upright citizens. You would never catch them doing anything wrong. So how in the world would he be able to teach people to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees? And he says, listen, heaven is beyond the scope that you will not get there unless you exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Well, he tells us in the next number of formulas how that is, because the scribes and Pharisees were like this: as long as you look good on the outside, you're good. Okay, the scribes and Pharisees had a righteousness that they had taken God's law, made their extra rules that even looked like better. You know, they made laws even around the law, and they look so good. Okay? But please note verse 21. You're going to use the first few ones as the example of the rest. You have heard it said by those of old that you shall not murder, and whoever murders is liable to judgment. Now, everybody knows that. I mean, the Ten Commandments has that. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, "You fool," will be liable to hell's fire. You see, the formula that we're going to hear is "you have heard it said." You know who has been saying it? The scribes and the Pharisees. And what they say is, you can hate, just don't carry it out. You can hate in your heart, and nobody's going to know. You just can't put fist or knife or anything else to it. And Jesus says, no, if you are angry in your heart against your brother, you are guilty. Adultery. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with a lustful intent has already committed adultery in his heart with her. You see, they had been said, you can look, you just can't touch, right? It's okay, you can look, just can't touch. You can lie if you, in the way that you made your promise, left yourself that loophole that if it got a little sticky, you could take the loophole. It's okay because you didn't intend to lie, but you left a little bit of a squeak room that you could get out of it if it got too costly. You see, what Jesus does in this opening passage is he exposes the heart. See, murder starts where? In the heart. Adultery starts where? In the heart. Lying, wanting to squeak out of giving your word starts where? In the heart. Jesus exposes the heart. The Pharisees wanted to hide their heart. They wanted to look good on the outside, but the inside is full of a different purpose. So Jesus cuts through here and says, your righteousness needs to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees because they look good on the outside, but in their hearts is anger, adultery, lying, and vengeance against their enemies. And Jesus says, I want you to pray for your enemies. In fact, later on, he'll describe that our enemies become our neighbors, and there is no neighbor that we cannot love and that we cannot forgive. We're pretty familiar with that passage. And what Jesus does is he tells the truth about the heart, and he confronts us with our hearts, not just with our behavior. In chapter 6, though, you've got to see this progression. In chapter 6, he goes from exposing the heart in our attitudes to exposing our hearts in our motives. Chapter 6, verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Okay, so he says, before, in chapter 5, we were trying to hide how bad we really are inside. In chapter 6, he's saying the way you look so good on the outside is not that good anyway. You follow that? He's not exposing the secrets of our heart. He's exposing the motives of our hearts. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Who's he talking about? Who's he talking about? Come on. Who's he talking about? Don't sound a trumpet like the hypocrites do. Who's he talking about? The Pharisees. There are different things that they think about this. Some people actually think they had somebody that went around like with a little horn, like, oh, I'm about to give. Oh, everybody look. Oh, wow. Look at that. He put all, hell, you can't get a hold of change these days anyway, right? Coin shortage. What they would do is they would change all their paper money into coins, and they only had coins anyway, what I'm talking about. So they would dump all these huge coins, and you would hear it going clink, 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 okay? The bigger the dump of coins, the louder it sounded. And remember, that's what he talks about, the widow who's and he says the two mites. You don't hear those two things. They go beep, beep. Meanwhile, somebody walked in and whoosh. That's what those coins machines sound like in the bank, right? When you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do. Why do they do that? So that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. In chapter 5, what are we trying to keep secret? Our sin. In chapter 6, he says, if you really want to do these things unto God, you keep these things a secret. You keep your good things a secret. Because otherwise, our hearts are exposed for the motives that are truly there. Please notice the pattern goes on. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they stand and pray in the synagogue. Don't you remember? There's another whole story about this. The Pharisee that goes in and says what? I thank God that I'm not like that guy over there. I fast how many times a week? I don't remember. Twice a week. I give this, I do that. And the other guy is over there like, oh, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Boy, am I glad. At least he admits he's a sinner. But yet it says, who goes home righteous? The guy over in the corner who's beating his chest, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Who goes away unforgiven, especially for his pride? And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. Who were the hypocrites? The Pharisees and the scribes. You could throw the Sadducees in there as well. For they love to stand and pray in the synagogue and at the street corners. Can you imagine the street corners? Why the street corners? Huh? Because that's where everybody has to walk, right? You're standing on the street corner, you know, the little sign says you can walk, and, oh, bless you, O Lord, God of heaven, blah, 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 and everybody's streaming by. Oh, my, look at that. Look, he's not even going to cross this time. The crosswalk is going to have to empty out because his prayer is so long. He's saying, you hypocrites, go into your closets. Your Father sees in secret. By the way, we found out that the Father sees in secret in chapter 5 because the Father sees the secrets of our hearts. But he says, I want to see the secrets of the motives of what you do good. And when you fast, verse 16, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites. Oh, man. Can you please hide that hamburger? This is my fasting day. I'm offended by your hamburger. Okay? You're making me so hungry and I'm fasting today. You know, you're not helping the cause here. He's like, no. When you fast, don't look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, and then your fasting may be seen, that it not be seen by others, but by your Father who sees in secret. Every hidden motive exposed. Please turn over to Matthew 23, because this brings this discussion full circle. Doesn't happen at the same time. In fact, this happens basically at the end of Jesus' ministry. But this is the flip side of what he opened his ministry with. When he opened his ministry, he was talking to the crowds, and he was using what the scribes and the Pharisees did as a backdrop to say, your righteousness and your righteousness and your motives need to not be what these people do. When he gets to chapter 23, he's still talking to his disciples and the crowds, but now the Pharisees come to the forefront, because now instead of just talking about what they do, he speaks directly to them. I want you to notice that he calls them hypocrites. How many times? Did you count them? How many times does he call them hypocrites? Anybody know? 7 times, because he uses the word in the sentence as well. How many times does he say that they are blind or blind guides? 5. And how many times does he call them snakes? Twice. Do you think today's culture would stand? What kind of commentary would people make about this, speaking of Jesus, when he calls people to their face 7 times hypocrites, 5 times that they are blind guides leading people to their destruction, and twice he calls them snakes? Was Jesus wrong for doing this? Is there a place for the church to still do this? Some of you are like, Why would Jesus be so blunt? Let's look at some of these. Go back to the beginning of the chapter. Jesus said to the crowds and the disciples, okay, so he's talking to them, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but they do not practice. Okay, so he's like, listen, they do tell you the scriptures, they do know the Old Testament law, they do, and by the way, they were the teachers of the day, they were the rabbis. So he's like, listen to what they say, but don't follow their example. How do we know not to follow their example? Because back in chapter 5 and 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, we were told what their example was about. It was about externalism. It was about appearing to be righteous, but inside you could be whoever you wanted to be. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move a finger. They have all these outside rules. But the next one is really. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues. I know some other guys who like that, and Jesus took them to task over it. Drop down a little bit. Drop down to verse 15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. You see, the Pharisees liked adding more Pharisees to their numbers because then they were known to be successful. And they taught this religion, but they didn't teach righteousness. But notice what he says very clearly. And when he becomes a proselyte, or when he becomes your disciples, you make him twice as much a child of what? Again, Jesus cuts right to people who follow you are going to hell. Why was that such a concern? Why did he say that he makes them twice a child of hell? He says that they're made a child of hell because they're trying to follow the Pharisees thinking that they're doing what's right, but what they're teaching them and what they're teaching is what's right is a form of works that's never going to get them to heaven. So number one, they're following them because they think that they're godly examples, and number two, they're believing what they're teaching, which is sending anybody who believes this to hell. They're following you into hell thinking that you were leading them into heaven. And Jesus says, you traveled all the way to make them your own disciple. You traveled that distance, and the distance they're going is to hell. Verse 16, woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if he swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound to his oath. You blind fools! For which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? Drop down to 19, you blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? They had come up with a religion that actually, in this particular one that he is condemning them, made money their real God. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Look at verse 24. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. He's like, you have all these little laws about people tithing their mint and cumin and all these other things, and yet the camel inside of you, and by the way, the camel was a unclean animal. He says, so you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel, because the camel was their attitude towards their parents of not wanting to give them any financial help because it was all dedicated to God. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and plate, and that the outside may be clean. Have you ever had a problem with your dishwasher? How many of you know that sometimes if you put too big of a pan on the bottom, it could keep the water from totally spraying on the top? So you put everything in the dishwasher, and you put a pot on the bottom, a big soup pot or something, and it goes through that whole cycle, and you begin pulling the top things off, and they look fine on the outside, but then you look inside, and what? There's still coffee stains on the cup. How many of you still put those away? Hey, it's been through the dishwasher, right? Right? Yeah. There was coffee in it before. I'll put more coffee in it later. It's okay. It's all good, right? Ooh, you're like, man, I'm not drinking any coffee at your house next time. Hey, it went through the dishwasher, right? The outside looks great. Okay, so it has a couple specks. You know, you pull out the soup bowl, and hey, I'm only going to put more soup in it. It doesn't matter if there's. I know some of you are starting to go like. Does God look at the outside, or does God look at the heart? What did he tell Samuel? You look at man looks on the outward appearance, but what? God looks on the heart. How do we know that? Because back in Matthew Chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, I'm looking at your heart. I'm not looking at the outside. I'm looking at your heart. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Well, this is a big one. Please look at this one. If you haven't opened your Bible, you got to look at this one. Okay, we're in Matthew 23, verse 29. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of our prophets. Poor Elijah. Oh, wait, Elijah doesn't have a grave, right? Poor Elisha. Oh, we're mourning over Zechariah, and we're mourning over all these prophets. And he's like, you do so good at decorating the grave, and you're still killing the prophets. Notice what he says. Thus you are witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. And if you're the sons of those who murdered the prophets, it's most likely that you are going to be what? The same ones who murder more of the prophets. That's what he's saying. Therefore, I have sent you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town. When did that start happening? The book of Acts. So that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah. What do you notice about the two letters of those guys' names? You're going to kill all the prophets from what? A to Z. Abel, the very beginning of the Bible. Zechariah, one of the last ones that they have killed most recently. And then he says these words. Drop down to verse 37. Because Jesus now turns from the Pharisees, from the crowd, and he looks at Jerusalem and he says these words, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills" what? "The prophets, and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wing, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" What is the prophet that they're just about to kill? What's his name? Jesus. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem." The city that was to be known as the place that worships God is going to take the Creator himself and crucify him. How could they have gotten to that place? Because of their hardened, unrepentant hearts. Why am I speaking to you this way? We'll take up Luke 7 another Sunday. Jesus did not denounce people because he played power games. He did not denounce them because he had pleasure in making other people squirm. By the way, at one point, the Pharisees do come to the disciples, and they're like, we were offended by what Jesus said. And Jesus was like, well, it was good that they were offended because it's true. At one point, they even said to him, "Are you saying that we're blind?" And he said, "If you at least recognized you're blind, then you wouldn't be blind, but you are so blind because you know that you're blind and you insist on being blind. My father had a saying, there is no man so blind as the man who" what? "Will not see." And we live in a world right now that will not see the truth. And we represent the truth if we are not like the Pharisees. And the Bible needs people who are willing to not only live the truth, but be able to speak the truth in love and be able to defend the truth with no apology. We do not apologize for the truth. We do not explain God. When he says that it's sin, it's sin. We don't talk about cultural differences. We don't talk about times have changed. God said it's sin, it's sin. And it needs to be forgiven. Thank God that Jesus came to forgive. The other thing, Jesus exposed, he used truth to expose sin, not so he could stand there and poke a finger, but so that people, when they saw their sin, could be forgiven. That's what we're going to read about in Luke chapter 7. A woman comes and she's known as a sinner, and she leaves with Jesus' words, "You are forgiven." While a man who hosts Jesus thinks that he is so righteous, and Jesus just keeps saying, "Look at this that you should have done. Look at this that you should have done." And she leaves having the words that her faith has made her well, and he leaves knowing that he really only invited Jesus because he wanted the opportunity to say that the famous rabbi had visited his home. Are you ready to defend the truth? Do you think that when people say, "My Jesus would not have said those kind of things. My Jesus would not have taken a whip and driven them out of the temple. My Jesus is not that kind. My Jesus is not an angry Jesus." I don't know what's the matter with you people. Are you ready not to become angry? But are you ready to give an answer? That's what that passage in Peter's about. It's not giving an answer when it's easy. It's giving an answer when it's costly. My Jesus was a man of blunt truth because he wanted the truth of the heart to be exposed so that then the heart could be changed. That's my Jesus.